Hello and welcome, it's time for another episode of Bonus. For the gameplay this week, I have some Carmageddon Reincarnation for you, which is, I suppose it's like an HD remake of the original Carmageddon. It's currently in early access on Steam, and I actually was a backer on Kickstarter. In fact, it's the only Kickstarter project I've ever backed, because I love Carmageddon that much. If you haven't already seen it, I've actually done a video about the original Carmageddon on Retro Ahoy, and I can heartily recommend that you watch it, because that will bring you up to speed on what the game is and all of the events that led up to this game's eventual Kickstarter and release. But if you just want the basics, all you really need to know is that it's a race, but really it's more about smashing your opponents into pieces and running over pedestrians. That's how you get points. Now, I've got to admit, it was never a particularly challenging game, but it is a lot of fun. Now, the early access version is far from finished. This is one of, I think, 4 maps, and none of them are finished. None of the cars are finished, and it is generally a bit of a buggy mess. But, you know, the fundamentals are coming together. The damage model's quite nice. The fact you can lose wheels and be squashed into all sorts of peculiar shapes is nice. But yeah, it's far from finished. They call it pre-alpha, but I guess what they mean by pre-alpha is that it's an alpha, but it's actually an alpha, not like the fashionable alphas you see these days, which are actually just early demos. Anyway, this is the countryside map. You'll see a snowy map later on, because the game crashed on me, believe it or not. Anyway, if you are keen to try it, it is on Steam. It is relatively pricey. It's £20 if you're in the UK. I imagine it's about $30 in the US. So maybe the more sensible amongst you might want to wait until it's finished. Anyway, that's the game I'm playing. Let's get on with the questions. The Desert Eagle HD says, "Hey Stu, will you ever do commentary on iOS games?" Well, I'm not really huge on mobile or tablet gaming. I don't own an iPhone, I don't own an iPad or anything like that, so I wouldn't hold my breath. That being said though, I wouldn't mind having a means to record mobile games. So at some point, maybe in the future, if there was a way to record maybe Android through HDMI and get a 1080p output from that, I might expand my my recording setup to incorporate that. I think Amazon have announced an Android-based console today, which is very, very similar to the Ouya, which, well, we'll see how well it does. But yeah, me getting something like that isn't out of the question, even though it looks pretty dreadful, because the ability to record mobile games could prove useful in the situations, you know, where I might want to talk about them. As far as recording iOS games is concerned, I have no clue. Apple are generally pretty locked down systems, so maybe there's a way. Maybe I imagine it's a proprietary connector, but maybe you can get HDMI out from an iPad or something. At the minute though, without a decent recording solution and without much of a will to do anything iOS or Android based, I wouldn't hold your breath, like I say. Liam Higo says, "Do you plan on covering Destiny?" Destiny is very much on my radar. A new IP from someone like Bungie is it's a once-in-a-decade thing, really, so they certainly have my attention. The game itself looks like a blend of Halo with Borderlands 2, but you never know, that might be alright. Now, I've got to admit, I was never huge on Halo multiplayer, but no, I'm gonna give Destiny a fair shake when it comes out. You can expect to see, you know, at least one video for it. I'll probably do another episode of Game DNA for it, because it'll be nice to talk about Marathon and Halo and the whole sort of Bungie connection again. As far as weapon guides, well, it depends. It really it depends on whether the game needs weapon guides and whether I enjoy it sufficiently. iHazar says, "What do you think about the Batman Arkham series, or non-movie tie-in superhero games in general?" I wouldn't say I was a huge fan of superhero games. It's generally not a huge draw for me, but I have played both Batman Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. I have yet to play Arkham Origins because it didn't really perform that well critically. And, I don't know, it felt a little bit close to Arkham City's release, even though it could have been a couple of years for all I know. I did really enjoy Arkham Asylum. I thought that was a pretty cracking game. I was less impressed with Arkham City. It was still it was the same mechanics, and it still had a similar feel, but, I don't know, the world felt somehow more constrictive. Like, I could believe that Arkham Asylum had a relatively small map because it was an asylum. But the city felt relatively cramped. It didn't really feel like a city to me. So that was disappointing. I mean, I still enjoyed it. Just, I think Asylum is my favourite of the two. So they announced another one, didn't they? Arkham Knight for the next-gen platforms. Which, I'm sure, you know, it'll be a graphical bump. Probably more of the same, but I guess that's not a bad thing. I might pick it up, we'll see. Gavin Murray asks, will Ted be okay? Alright, it's time for a Ted update. Last week Ted was very sick. He was jaundiced, and he was very lethargic, and he was just generally very ill. So, of course, we've been to the vets multiple times since then. It did seem like he had quite a serious condition, you know, it could have been something like cancer or liver failure or something along those lines. As of today, and progressively since we started treatment, he is much, much better. He's more alert, he's more active, he's certainly more boisterous when it comes to giving him a pill, and his jaundice has started to fade, which is, you know, these are all good signs. He was pretty severely anemic. I think he only had about a quarter of the typical levels of hemoglobin that a cat should have. So it's going to take him a while to recover from that, but in a couple of weeks he should be back to normal. Bosman1678 says, Stu, I found your comments about lager interesting. When you say you cannot tell the difference, are you only referring to light or Helles lager? I can't imagine that blind you cannot tell the difference between an American premium lager, an Oktoberfest, a Munich Dunkel, and a Bock. All lagers, all very different. Yes, when I was talking about a blind taste test last week, it was we were talking about lagers commonly available in the UK, which, unfortunately, all happen to be pale lagers. They're all, you know, if they're commonly available, then they're commercial, and if they're commercial, then they're most probably just a pale lager. Which is a shame, really, because, like you mentioned, there are quite a few different diverse lagers, and they all are pretty different. They still have, like, a certain crisp characteristic, you know, from the particular yeast. But yes, they are certainly very different, and I most likely could tell you the difference in a blind taste test. I bought quite a few lagers of all sorts and types for my lager video on Drinks Ahoy, and I've been doing some research, shall we say, ever since then. I've had a huge stockpile of lagers that I bought for the video. Unfortunately, I've drunk all the interesting ones now, all the Dunkels and the Schwarzbiers and the different ones. They've all gone, so all I'm left with now are a whole bunch of boring, insipid pale lagers of a variety of commercial brands. And to be fair, I mean, they're not that bad. Pale lagers are quite refreshing, they're crisp. It's just, you know, they're unadventurous. And like I mentioned last week, these particular beers I've been drinking, I would struggle to tell apart. XM Barrett says, what are your thoughts on Facebook purchasing Oculus VR? This was huge news last week, wasn't it? A bit of an outcry. Because obviously a lot of people distrust Facebook because of the whole privacy concerns. Facebook thrives on user data. That's pretty much their entire model. So the idea of someone invested in a business like that, gaining access to your eyeballs, I don't know. It's scary for some. Pair that with the Oculus Rift, which is a product that I think a lot of people had already invested in, whether they'd contributed via the Kickstarter or whether they'd sort of already made the purchase in their mind. I think there was a lot of goodwill and a lot of hope based around Oculus. So to have Oculus then snapped up by a company like Facebook, a company which is almost the polar opposite in terms of public appraisal, is disappointing. Of course, that being said, there is the counter-argument, well, it's $2 billion, who could turn that down? And this is true, that there have been $2 billion worth of investment in virtual reality, and that's a huge, huge deal. So I think definitely good for virtual reality, but possibly less good for Oculus. I mean, in theory, everything could turn out to be okay. Facebook could be completely hands-off with Oculus. They could let them do their thing, and they could come up with a fantastic product that's, you know, it's not intrusive. You don't have to sign into Facebook. It's just the Oculus Rift funded by Facebook, and that would be okay. It's just if Facebook start to impose their will as far as the platform's concerned, then maybe there is an issue. But again, it's about virtual reality, not about the Oculus. The Oculus is just one potential headset, and there are alternatives on the horizon. I think Valve have been doing some research, of course Sony have Project Morpheus, and there's a whole host of others. Once the Oculus hits the markets, it's only a matter of time before there's a Chinese knockoff. So the future of VR looks pretty good, and it could be really cool. But I mean, I lived through the 90s, and virtual reality was a thing in the 90s too. Of course, it was, you know, it was gimmicky and primitive back then, but I don't know, there is still the question of whether it's advanced far enough to be taken seriously today. Maybe this whole Oculus thing, just another bubble, just another blip in interest, and it'll turn out to be an impractical fad. So my bets are hedged, as far as VR is concerned, as far as Oculus are concerned. If there's a headset that's good and comes out at the right price, I might invest in it if there are games for it, but I don't know, I think there's a mountain to climb yet. Andrew Hoffman says, Stu, have you ever thought about a video on a brief history of game controllers? Well, I have now, since you've asked that question. My immediate thoughts are reservations about the cost of such a video, because to do it properly, you're going to have to actually get some controllers and then, shoot them and do all that. So that would require some investment in terms of money to actually obtain the controllers, and I imagine some of them could be very expensive. For instance, it would be nice if you could talk about stuff like the Steel Battalion controller, which is a 40-button monstrosity for the Xbox. But they aren't cheap. They probably run a few £100 at least. And I suppose, well, I could just use photographs of it, I guess. In fact, in that particular instance, I'd almost certainly have to, because you can't justify spending that amount of money for what might be a 10-second clip. But, I mean, using other people's photographs has copyright implications. You can generally get away with it, but it is a risk factor. Couple that with the fact that hardware is generally less interesting than the software that runs on it, and I don't know, I mean, it's something that could be done. Certainly if I had access to, someone's collection of every video game controller ever, it'd be quite nice. I could take my DSLR, do some filming, and then make a pretty decent video, but no, I think for brief history I'm going to focus on software, stuff that I can do more easily. I do think a video on games controllers could be interesting, but like I say, it's circumstance is the enemy. Dark Goat 3 says, Stu, you live in Manchester, and so I'm guessing you know of Altrincham. Well, there is a gaming cafe called Fraggers there, and I would suggest you give it a go. It basically has 30 high-end PCs for you to play on, and also has some nostalgic consoles on offer. I do know Altrincham. It's about 3-4 miles away from where I am. I don't know, I'd have to leave the house though. I'd have to leave the house and pay for the privilege of using a computer other than my own. I could just stay here and play games, couldn't I? I guess it'd probably be better for a meetup or something, I guess. Oh, maybe I could have the first Xbox Ahoy meetup there. That's not a real thing, alright? Don't make any plans yet. Jackan1679 6 says, as you just talked about the Gooser challenge in Titanfall, Respawn has just announced that they are reducing that number to 5 instead of 50. Do you think a publisher who involves themselves with the community are in turn more successful compared to more isolated companies? And do you think that will make people more likely to buy their games? Well, that's good news on the Gooser front. I was quite content to sit at Gen 5 forever, because I didn't think I was ever going to get 50 Gooser kills. But 5, I might be able to do, maybe, eventually. Hitting Gen 10 is one of my goals for the summer on Titanfall. It's part of the reason I'm doing a Titanfall series, just so I've got an excuse to play it. Anyway, as far as developers supporting multiplayer games, yeah, of course, good support is a good thing, and if a game is supported well, I do think it will help maintain multiplayer population, and the more you retain that multiplayer population, I suppose the more likely it is people are going to invest in stuff like DLC, cash shop purchases, or the next title. I think for continuous support of multiplayer, you do need a certain type of model, and the $60 up front for a game model isn't the best for a multiplayer game. You either want ideally a subscription service, because then you've got an incentive to try and preserve your subscribers, or failing that, make it free to play and have a cash shop, or maybe regular DLC, that involves purchase. And that way, a developer supporting a game isn't just necessarily about building goodwill, but also about, building a revenue stream. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I'm no fan of pay to win, but as far as cosmetic items or, DLC content, new maps and stuff like that, then, yeah, I think it can help enrich and prolong a multiplayer experience. I'm kind of hoping that Titanfall has a fairly robust DLC plan, because I think, if they support this game really well, and if they actually engender a community, then they will do better when it comes to Titanfall 2. Unfortunately, if those controlling the purse strings are too focused on short-term gain, then, I don't know, on a game like Titanfall they might be tempted to just cut and run, as I don't expect sales were that spectacular for a new franchise on a limited set of consoles and PC. I mean, that does kind of limit your install base, so you're not going to get the huge multi-plat sales that people might have expected for a AAA title. So I don't know, I mean, depends on how much they've anticipated this. They must have known that by being Microsoft exclusive and PC as well, Microsoft is kind of PC, isn't it? They must have known by limiting their output that sales records were not going to be spectacular. So it depends on how they play it. Maybe they'll play this as a prelude to success in the sequel. So I think for Titanfall in particular, the support of multiplayer is absolutely critical, because they do need to build some goodwill, and they do need to keep people interested in the game so that they're, more likely to invest when Titanfall 2 comes around, presumably in about 2 or 3 years' time. So it remains to be seen. I was quite impressed with EA and Mass Effect 3's multiplayer. I thought the support on that was pretty spectacular. I think there was something like 4 free map packs. And of course this was all supported by people making cash purchases. But these things were not necessary for the enjoyment of the game. You could play without investing anything extra, and you could unlock the same stuff as everybody else, and you still got to enjoy the map DLC, which was, it's a generous approach, I think. It's not normal for EA to be that generous. So we'll see how Titanfall turns out. I mean, at its core, it's a crystalline slice of perfection in terms of multiplayer. I just wish there was more content. Carbon Nexus says, Stu, what's your favourite type of biscuit? Mine's Obnob. Hobnobs are good? Definitely, yeah. I think they're probably milk chocolate, my favourite variety of hobnob. I know a thing or two about biscuits. I mean, I did work in the biscuit industry for 3 years. So, when I tell you what biscuits I like, you are getting a qualified opinion here. So I'm down the biscuit aisle. I can pick out a few selections from a basket. This is what I'm going for. McVitie's chocolate digestive caramels. I mean, you've got the savoury sweet taste of the digestive, offset against milk chocolate, and a layer of chewy caramel. It's an indulgent mix, and for that reason it's definitely a favourite. Next up, something a little bit more traditional, the Garibaldi. It's a very short, crispy type of biscuit in 2 layers, and in the middle there is this layer of currants. Very chewy, very tart, and with the right level of sweetness for the biscuit. They're simple, but they are one of my favourites. Finally, the last thing I'm going to be looking for is anything by Tunnocks, in their familiar yellow boxes and the red and white foil. The traditional caramel wafers, fantastic. Snowballs, fantastic. Tea cakes, all wonderful. As far as biscuits are concerned, Tunnocks can do no wrong. So those are my top 3 biscuit picks. For those of you in America, when I say biscuit, of course I refer to what you might call a cookie. But cookies are kind of something different here. They refer to a specific style of biscuit in the UK. Limit says, how do you get your PS4 to record without the HDCP? Well, I actually do own a HDCP stripper, something called the 3D Fury, which is an expensive box which strips out HDCP. However, as it turns out, I don't need that because I also have an HDMI switch, which conveniently enough strips out HDCP as well. It's also a lot cheaper. In case you're wondering, it's the Kenovo 5:1 HDMI switch, which I use. Yeah, as far as I can tell, completely strips out any HDCP, which is, well, it's convenient. Means I don't have to use my stripper. I'm Amrit says, hello Stuart, I've noticed you no longer introduce yourself or sign off as Xbox Ahoy. Is there a specific significance of this? Yes, I'm trying to make a conscious effort to disassociate myself with the Xbox branding because Microsoft own the term Xbox, and I'm trying to make any branding that I do at least have a little bit of distance between any sort of official Microsoft communication. This is to protect myself from any legal issues down the road, really. And so I can, cover games outside of what's available on the Xbox as well. I mean, I am presented with a real issue of, if it turns out that cross-platform games are better on the PS4, like let's take an example, Destiny for instance, let's say it runs at 1080p on the PS4 and 900p on the Xbox One, there is going to be a real temptation for me to play on the PS4. So in a situation like that, I don't want to be maybe forced into playing on the Xbox One if I'd rather play on a different platform. I was mooting actually recording my Titanfall footage on PC, because it would look a little bit better, especially if I was, working at native 1080p, because the Xbox One, I think only renders at 792p. Now for the moment that doesn't vex me too much, because my Blackmagic Intensity Pro only lets me record at 720p. It supports 1080p, but only at 30 frames a second. So the only feasible way for me to record on my Xbox One with the Blackmagic is to do so at 720p 60. I am waiting for a product to come on the market that will record 1080p 60. at which point 1080p rendering will become a much higher priority for my recordings. I recently bought a new graphics card, so Shadowplay is now an option for me on PC. This is how I recorded Carmageddon, and it works wonderfully. So I use that at any opportunity I can, but as far as playing Titanfall's concerned, when it comes to games that I play for long periods of time, like multiple hours, for the ergonomic perspective, I prefer to play with a controller. If I'm playing with a mouse and keyboard, I appreciate, it's more precise than a controller. I get that. But for extended play sessions, I get pains in my wrists when I use a mouse and keyboard. So, yeah, I want to use a controller for long play sessions because it's more comfortable for me. But on PC, you're up against people who are using mouse and keyboard, and they've got the benefit of the added precision. So consoles at least have this advantage from an ergonomic perspective, in that you're playing against other people who are also using controllers, and you're not at a disadvantage. I've said this before, and people say, you can use a controller on PC, Stu. Yes, I do know, but you are at a disadvantage when you do this. So for me, consoles let me play on a controller without being hamstrung, and they're also a little bit easier to record from. Shadowplay is brilliant, but it's not quite as good as a fully hardware solution. Editing Blackmagic footage is a dream. Seeks are instant, and I can demux multiple streams simultaneously in a project without any sort of incident. A lot of the software recorders I've used on PC, I've had codec issues, particularly when demuxing simultaneous streams, which sounds like an edge case, but in cases like crossfades, I have issues with fraps, for instance. Fraps sometimes crashes when you demux two streams simultaneously. From what I've seen, Shadowplay much better on this front. I don't think I've had a crash when I've been editing Shadowplay footage, which is really promising. The only downside is it only supports Direct 3D at the minute, it doesn't support OpenGL stuff. Anyway, we've hit the time. I'm not going to bore you with my workflow technical details, it's kind of dim. It just vexes me. I know that if I upload footage from an Xbox One, there's going to be some cretin going, oh, it looks much better on the PC. Yes, you're right, the game does look marginally better on PC. You can run at a higher resolution. But it turns out, by the time you've crushed everything into a streamed YouTube video, then they look pretty much the same, and the Xbox One, certainly good enough. Until next time, farewell.